Merci tout le monde d'être ici. Parmi un groupe de collègues vraiment heureux et heureux. Nous sommes ici parce que le projet de loi S-203 vient d'avoir un vote de passage dans la Chambre de communes. So we are a very happy group here before you today. There are 9 of us. We're going to try to speak briefly about why we are so relieved, gratified, and appreciative to each and every single one of us up here has worked hard, and so have thousands and thousands of Canadians to see S-203 finally pass, the bill that bans the keeping of cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises in captivity. So I'm going to, first of all, to the person who started it all, and I think deserves the lion's share of the credit, our own Willie for Free Willie, Senator Wilfred Moore.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful. It's kind of a combination of relief and joy here because it's been 4.5 years since I started in this project, and couldn't have gotten it this far without the support of Canadians, as Elizabeth mentioned. Young people around the country, so many young colleagues, young people in Halifax who signed petitions and got them in for me to get to the House for people to table. The not-for-profit groups, the NGOs, Phil Demers, he and Barbara Cartwright and Elizabeth and Finn Donnelly were with me at the very start when we launched into this program, this project. And nobody wavered. Everybody got stronger. The team expanded. I was so happy last June when you had a press conference. Elizabeth, was it Nathaniel was with you, and Finn, and Michelle Rempel.
Yeah, we had a nonpartisan conference.
And I thought, boy, oh boy, we really do have an all-party support here. And from that moment onward, I just felt good, and I thought, I don't care what anybody says or does, we're going to get this done because these people want it, and Canadians wanted it. So, look, thank you for being here, and Canada is better for this. Thank you.
Gord, you're next.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm Gord Johnson, Member of Parliament for Courtenay Alberni, and I'm the NDP critic for Fisheries and Oceans and Coast Guard, and today is a historic day. Today is the most important piece of animal rights legislation that's been passed in Canadian history. I definitely want to thank Senator Moore for your relentless effort. He retired and just continued to work hard on this very important piece of legislation, and my friend from Saanich Gulf Islands, Elizabeth May, and of course Finn Donnelly and Nathan Cullen, who gave up his private member spot so that this bill could be read and passed before the House rose. Huge kudos to him and my Vancouver Island colleagues for putting pressure on Nathan to do that. And just a huge shout out to the hundreds of thousands of Canadians, the nonprofit organizations, First Nations and Indigenous people from coast to coast to coast that have led this crusade and worked together, making sure this wasn't a partisan issue, because this is a moral issue. And so we're just elated today. And it's a celebration for cetaceans, for animal rights, and for the planet and our oceans. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you.
Et je donne la parole à mon ami de Bloc québécois, Monique Posé.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Monique Posé, députée de Repentigny pour le Bloc québécois, mais également critique en matière d'environnement. Alors, d'abord, je veux saluer la persévérance, la ténacité que ça a pris de la part du sénateur et de la part des élus, la complicité aussi pour en arriver à l'adoption de ce projet de loi-là. Je dois vous dire qu'à chaque fois qu'il est question d'animaux, on a toujours beaucoup de courriels qui rentrent dans nos bureaux pour nous dire de supporter telle ou telle législation. Alors, c'était le cas également pour celle-là. Alors, on sait que c'est un sujet qui est des fois controversé, en tout cas, à tout le moins animé. Mais oui, quand on doit changer nos façons de faire pour l'environnement et à la lumière de ce qu'on apprend par les recherches, par les scientifiques et tout ça, oui, en quelque part, quand on change, bien, ça va déranger le plan d'affaires de quelqu'un en quelque part, mais c'est ce qu'il faut faire et c'est la bonne chose à faire. Alors, on veut saluer donc l'adoption de ce projet de loi-là parce que non seulement quand on pense ces animaux qui sont en captivité, mais il faut également penser à la façon dont ils sont capturer pour arriver en captivité. Alors, le projet de loi va donc solutionner un certain nombre de problèmes de ce côté-là. Alors, le Bloc québécois est très heureux d'avoir appuyé le projet de loi et d'avoir appuyé le sénateur et la députée de Saanich-Gulf Island. Merci.
Hello, I'm Camille Labchuk. I'm a lawyer and executive director of Animal Justice, Canada's only animal law organization. I'm here to say today that this is not only a tremendous leap forward for whales and dolphins, but for animal protection more generally in Canada. Not since our criminal animal cruelty laws were first enacted in the 1800s has Parliament passed any significant serious animal protection legislation. And the passage of Bill S-203 today signals the beginning of a whole new era where Parliament is considering animal issues, taking them seriously, and passing legislation. In the last election, Canadians did elect the most animal-friendly Parliament in Canadian history, with many MPs committed to animal protection, and we've seen very strong commitment from the Senate as well. So you can rest assured that this is only the beginning of a new era for animal protection in Canada, and that we can expect to see more legislation hopefully before the end of this month, and certainly in the future.
Barbara?
Hello there, my name is Barb Cartwright and I'm the CEO of Humane Canada, the National Federation of Humane Societies and SPCAs, the organizations from coast to coast to coast that have supported this bill since its introduction in 2015. The passage of Bill S-203 advances Canada's animal protection laws and leads an important shift towards the most animal-friendly parliament we've ever seen. It strengthens the abundant scientific evidence that the confinement of whales and dolphins is cruel, Canadians no longer support it, and Canada needs to lead the way to ending it. Parliament further recognized that the breeding of cetaceans in captivity had to be banned because it was not acceptable to allow the whales that are grandfathered now to continue to be bred and sold internationally. This is a critical step in ensuring that we do not end up with a beluga whale farm in southern Ontario. Once S-203 takes effect, this abhorrent activity will be illegal, and then hopefully all the whales and dolphins in captivity can be rehomed in a marine sanctuary. Finally, there are 4 bills moving through Parliament right now: S-203, a ban on shark finning, a ban on cosmetic testing on animals, and finally a ban on sexual assault of animals and all forms of animal fighting. We look forward to their passage and a progressive future for animal welfare in Canada. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diane Fraley, and I'm a member of Ontario Captive Animal Watch. We work to improve the inadequate and substandard laws with respect to animal welfare in the province of Ontario. I would first like to thank Senator Moore for introducing this bill, as well as all the politicians who supported and sponsored it throughout its painfully long process. As well, we would like to thank the thousands of individuals who signed petitions, emailed, and called their MPs, and as well the scientists who provided their expertise in support of the bill, in particular Dr. Ingrid Visser, who came from New Zealand not once but twice to speak at Senate. While we are elated with the passing of this bill, we would be remiss if we didn't bring attention to the fact that this bill does not help one single marine mammal that is currently living in captivity, and in particular, Kiska, the only captive orca in the world who resides in complete social isolation from any other marine mammal. So while we celebrate this win, please not forget Kiska, the poster child for this bill.
I'm Rebecca Aldworth, and I'm the Executive Director of Humane Society International Canada. Globally, HSI is one of the largest animal protection groups in the world, and we've been working for decades to end the cruel confinement to whales and dolphins for entertainment. Here in Canada, my organization has been a central part of this coalition, and I want to say a huge thank you to everybody that's here today, but also the many, many people who couldn't be here today who worked so hard to make this bill possible. In the wild, whales and dolphins form very powerful family bonds, and they can swim more than 100 miles in a day. But in captivity, those bonds are broken, and they are denied the most basic of their needs and forced to swim endless laps around their barren concrete tanks. The outcomes for these animals are horrendous: injuries, severe psychological distress, and death. And it's hard to quantify or even imagine the suffering that it's caused to cetaceans in captivity. But today, Canada has made history Today is a defining moment, not just for the protection of marine animals, but also for all Canadians. It's an enormous victory for Canadians who want this to be a more humane world. Thank you.
And Phil, as Senator Moore mentioned, when we had our first press conference in December 2015, former trainer at Marineland who moved us with the description of what it was like. Phil.
Thank you. Phil Demers. I worked at Marineland from 2000 to 2012. I spoke out against the now illegal practice of keeping whales and dolphins in captivity in 2012. Whereas the bill itself is it's a scientifically sound and it's based in science. For me, it's been an incredibly emotional journey, and so I'm just absolutely thankful that this bill wound up in the hands of absolute heroes, one after the other, piling onto each other and ensuring its passage. And so hats off to everybody. I'm still in disbelief, almost speechless, but thank you.
Nous sommes maintenant disponibles pour les questions. Je pense que presque tout le monde ici, c'est seulement anglophone, mais il y a quelqu'un qui peut parler aussi en français pour répondre aux questions. So we're open for any questions that anyone has.
And Senator Moore, as was noted by one of your associates, this bill does not release a single cetacean that's in captivity today. It bans the capture of cetaceans in Canadian waters, but that hasn't happened in 25 years. There's the breeding ban under threat of 200,000, but your colleagues in the Senate Fisheries Committee did put a rider that exempts the entertainment provision if you have a provincial license. Mm-hmm. So do you accept that they really got to your bill, and this is a weaker bill than the bill you wrote?
I don't think so. Your last point with regard to, I think you talked about the entertainment part of it. So we've tightened that up. There were amendments made to the Fisheries Act, which cover a number of the points that were raised in committee, in the House Committee of Fisheries and Oceans. And one thing was very valid, so that if you're, for example, a travel agent in Canada selling tickets to people to take a vacation in the States, we can't, obviously, we don't have a jurisdiction there, so you would not be liable for any kind of legal action because of that. These are things that are taking place in another country. But the rest of it that you mentioned, it might be that some things have not happened in a few years. However, even now as we speak, I think somebody mentioned here this morning with regard to Marineland, they've already gotten a couple of permits to sell belugas to the aquarium in Valencia, Spain, which interestingly enough is managed by the Vancouver Aquarium. So, they were well aware that this bill was coming, so they're trying to offload what they can beforehand. But I'm hopeful that with the work of Dr. Laurie Marino and the Sea Sanctuary Society, that we will have a sea sanctuary on the East Coast for belugas and one on the West Coast for orcas.
And my second question, this came up in Commons Justice Committee after your retirement. There were members who said, someone mentioned the cosmetics bill, that's effectively dead. No one thinks the Parliament is going to pass that. They don't have time. There's a shark finning bill they put as a rider on C-68 in the Senate. That'll pass. Took a long time. This one you passed this morning.
Yes.
Bear baiting, it's all little piecemeal approaches to whatever advocates see as the overarching theme of animal rights. So do you anticipate, or hope that at some point the 43rd Parliament will say one bill, omnibus bill, animal rights, start to finish?
I don't know. In my time in the Senate, there was attempts to change the criminal code with regard to animal rights, and it went on and on. It was very tough legislation. People were dealing with it in the extremes. Like if I'm a beef farmer, you're going to prevent me from doing my work and my livelihood. I mean, it got so extreme. the debate lost its focus. I don't know that there'll ever be one bill like that. I had many calls in the course of this work, of this project, asking me, what about this animal? What about that animal? We stayed focused on the cetaceans. You can't do it. We didn't start out that way. I started in this cause because of the movie Blackfish, which I viewed with my son, and he said, well, Dad, can you do something about that? I thought, well, yeah, I can try. Yeah, I can start something. Yeah. But we stayed focused on cetaceans. To try to bring in all other species, my heart wasn't there. All right, I knew where I was coming from. I knew where I want to get to. And I knew that by sticking with these cetaceans, whales, porpoises, and dolphins, I knew if we stuck with that, we'd have a better shot. Yeah. Because I recalled what happened before when they tried to do it encompassing animal rights and protection bill. It was very tough, and I thought, we're not going to go there. We're going to stick to our plan, stick to what we think Canadians want to be. And I think we were right. You know, and in the course of one of my speeches, I said, and the great Mahatma Gandhi said, the civility of a nation can be judged by the way it treats its animals. And I believe that.
Can I add just briefly? There was I did a private member's bill in the 41st Parliament exclusively on shark finning. I didn't bring it forward in the 42nd Parliament, both because I didn't have a good slot and also because I thought Nathaniel Erskine-Smith's bill, being that he was a Liberal, a government-side member, would get it through. And that, of course, dealt with shark finning as well as other aspects of animal cruelty. Shark finning, by the way, shouldn't be seen as you just threw them all in the category of animal rights legislation. The finning of sharks is leading to the loss of populations, leading to extinction of sharks. So it's a larger ecological argument than individual rights of the treatment of individual animals, although I suppose there's a middle ground there. But I completely agree with what Senator Moore has said about the attempt to bring in, and I full credit to Nathaniel Erskine-Smith for trying. It was a really good bill, but it got kiboshed, just as he said, from people saying, well, if you apply this to agriculture, just as in the floor of the chamber earlier today, someone said, well, you could take the whale bill and you just add in and horses, and then you can't keep horses in captivity. But to say, no, that's not the intent here. The intent is to focus on animals based on the science of what their needs are and when it becomes cruel. We do need to bring our legislation up into a place where the criminal code is properly amended. We need to make many more changes. I'm very grateful, and I think I do want to stress again how important it is that C-68 get through the Senate. It amends and repairs the damage done by Harper's omnibus budget bill in spring 2012. It repairs the Fisheries Act, but it also includes companion pieces to S-203 in terms of banning the taking of whales in captivity. It does more to, we need all of them passed together. We needed S-203 and we need C-68. And as you mentioned, Tom, C-68 now does include provisions to end not the practice of shark finning, that's been illegal in Canada for a long time, but the trade in commerce of shark fins, leading to the threat to the survival of whole populations and indeed species of sharks.
Question for either Ms. May or Senator Moore. This bill obviously took a long time to get to where we are today. Can you just talk a little bit about the process and why it's been so slow to get here?
I think I'll leave that to Senator Moore, who had to deal head-to-head. I mean, it was the Senate that took the long time, and a lot of conservative senators. I mean, we still don't have an answer for the complaint I filed about whether Marineland had violated the Lobbyist Registration Act, because clearly Marineland did have whales and dolphins in captivity, but managed to hold conservative senators in captivity for a remarkably long time.
So I first, we started this bill in 2015 in June. It was then number 230. Then we had recess, election. So I go back in the fall, introduce it, becomes 203, new bill. Spoke to it in January of 2016. And then the process goes on in the Senate. So a number of senators, Senator Janice Johnson from Manitoba, she was the critic, spoke favor of the bill, gave a wonderful speech. And then a guy named Don Plett, also from Manitoba, he says to me one day, well, you can't be the critic and be against a bill or in favor of a bill. I said, well, you've got a labor relations bill here, and I'm the critic, and I'm for it. I think it's good law. Oh, well, I don't know about that. So then it went on and on. He was going to speak, and he kept promising me he's going to speak, and he didn't. And he's playing the rules of the Senate. You know, take the adjournment, it can go on and on. Or else someday, if he doesn't want to take it, he gets somebody to take the adjournment, and that happened a number of times. And that through the Senate breaks, looking at me leaving in January 2017, he thought I was going to be gone and the bill was going to be gone. So, of course, didn't happen with the encouragement and ongoing support. So the rules of the Senate, and I spoke to the rules chairman, that you can't have continual adjournments. Normally, the spirit of that is to give you time to prepare remarks and to make reasonable comments about a bill, whether you're for or against it. But you can't just keep adjourning it ad nauseum without any. Should be some kind of a cap on that, whether it's sitting days or how many times you adjourn it. Because it can be, and this is what happened. It was the ultimate abuse. I don't think any bill they said this is the longest standing bill in the history, this is the longest parliament. It's crazy. It should have happened. They waltzed around. They tried to kill it in committee twice. And then they moved a hoist motion which would have killed the bill. And in my right of a second final reply, I had to, something I've never had to do before, but moved it and got it into committee, where they tried to kill it there twice in camera sessions. And but Senator Jim Munson and Senator Libby Hubley were able to prevail and save it there. So there are a lot of sort of unsung, it's not just me, so many unsung heroes or people who have worked all along the way to keep it alive. And then again, we get into the House, and that whole session in the House and the timing of it, like our spot, as Elizabeth mentioned, was the 20th of June. The House is set to rise on the 21st. So we go to the 20th, Elizabeth might get to speak, but the opposition could stand and defer the vote for 2 days hence, which would be, and we're gone. So we would have been lost again. So we're so grateful for the generous gesture by Nathan Cullen. I mean, that another, so all these pieces, all these people, they were like-minded, and they were listening to Canadians, We were doing the country's business here, and the country's better for it.
I just want to add another big thank you. I mentioned it in my speech, but in the same way that we nearly lost the bill quite a few times in the Senate, we nearly lost it in the House and committee. And I'm very grateful that Minister of Fisheries, Jonathan Wilkinson, really stepped up to make sure that the individual members of the government side in the committee understood no amendments are needed to this bill. Yeah. And yes, so Jonathan Wilkinson helped us enormously. Sean Casey, his parliamentary secretary. Catherine McKenna was on board, but I also, another member I mentioned in my speech, but certainly Finn Donnelly pushed this a lot. So the two of the people we're thanking aren't running again. Nathan Cullen and Finn Donnelly did a lot to help us get the bill through. But there was a moment, I went to sleep one night, I think we were all aware that Monday in committee, we were likely to see the bill torpedoed by amendments that weren't necessary that would then force the bill to go back to the Senate. And so I'm really grateful that the government ministers stepped up and said, no, this is legislation we want to see passed. We've said publicly we want to see it passed, and they delivered on that. So thank you again to Jonathan Wilkinson. Oh, I mentioned, yeah. And yes, I did mention Nick Whalen also on the floor of the House because he's the one who gave us our slot on the 20th. It's hard getting slots when you have a private member's bill, just saying. So it's gone extremely well because everybody was prepared to live up to my favorite aphorism, you can accomplish anything you want if you don't care who gets the credit. Yes.
With Reland being the only organization in Canada that's truly affected by this legislation, can someone clarify what process they have to go through if they want to export any of their cetaceans?
So S-203 provides that the import or export of cetaceans after this bill is passed can only be done under two circumstances. The first is for science, and the second is in the best interests of that whale or dolphin. This is actually a novel test under Canadian law. Typically, the law considers human interests first and then sometimes the animal's interests, but this provision actually puts the whales and dolphins front and center. So anyone who wants to import or export a cetacean after this bill must seek a permit to do so, which can only be granted if it's for science or in the best interests.
And who grants that permit?
That'll be the Minister of Fisheries.
Do they define the best interest?
Well, that's going to be a new discussion. My understanding is that there will likely be discussion internally within the ministry to come up with guidelines to decide what is in the best interests. I expect that all of the advocacy groups that you see here behind you on the stage today will have some role to play in that and some input to provide.
Just to say, one of the exceptions in the bill on keeping a whale or dolphin in captivity is if that animal is in distress, and this is a rescue and a rehabilitation effort. So obviously that will inform the process of deciding what is best interest. Other parts of the bill and where the Parliament has seen fit to make an exception should guide the minister and officials when they're trying to decide what's the best interest. So if it's an animal that's in distress and might die without being taken into care, those are issues that will be resolved as the legislation is put to day-to-day use. Yeah, Martin.
Question then, because life doesn't end at the end of Parliament Hill. What about legal challenges? Do you anticipate court action?
I think that's a question you'll have to ask Marineland or the Vancouver Aquarium. They've both been extremely litigious in the past. They have sued activists who've spoken out against their practices. The Vancouver Aquarium sued to overturn the Parks Board ban that was imposed on them of keeping whales and dolphins. Vancouver Aquarium also sued a small filmmaker who made a short documentary exposing their practices. So I would not be surprised to see a legal challenge mounted, but you can rest assured that everyone behind me here today will rise to the occasion to respond.
Yeah. I'd also say it's hard. And I've had this conversation with members of Parliament from the Niagara region. We don't want Marineland to close down. We just don't want them to keep whales and dolphins in captivity. I've suggested on the floor of the House of Commons, it's an important tourist attraction in the Niagara region. And I think they should take a leaf out of the book of Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil figured out how to run a circus without animals. Mm-hmm. And I think Cirque du Soleil could help them figure out how to have real mermaids jumping and frolicking. And I'm serious. I think it would be a bigger tourist attraction with a use of an aquatic theater for something that really brings tourists in without cruelty. And I think I bear Marineland no ill will, but it certainly can't continue to run a business based on cruelty.
What do you make of today? We heard from Rob Nicholson quoting John Major in a legal opinion saying that there's problems in the French-English versions of the bill and that they don't correspond, and he was forecasting all sorts of potential problems, even quoting John Major on that.
Well, you can go. Well,
I heard what he said, and the government officials came back and they said they had no problem. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, so he didn't mention that. He talked about the first sitting of the committee. He didn't mention what happened the second one. These officials were brought back to clarify certain points, including that.
Do you have a sense, any of you, of how much correspondence you received from the public on this? Like you're talking about emails and petitions and so forth.
What was the question?
How many letters and well, we had thousands and thousands of letters and emails. I could ask my team if we had a. Do you have a Barbara? Do you have a total?
Yeah, we broke the Senate server at one point.
Twice.
Yeah, twice.
Twice we shut it down.
And yeah, there was a huge.
You have to come up to the mic.
The NGOs put out a huge effort at one point, which actually broke the Senate server. There was they couldn't handle all of the incoming emails, and yeah. So.
And during the House of Commons, the night that Elizabeth so eloquently talked about, where we all laid awake, I'm sure, worrying that the bill was going to be amended and therefore virtually killed, all of the groups went out to all of their constituents and asked them to reach out to the Prime Minister, the Environment Minister, the Fisheries Minister, and the committee to tell them how important this bill was. And from our numbers that we've been able to gather, about 22,000 emails and phone calls went into those people within a 48-hour period. And so a very significant demonstration on how important this was for Canadians.
talked a couple weeks ago about export permits for several belugas from marine land. What is the status of that? Were those issued and have those whales moved, or does that now all get complicated because of this bill?
Well, our understanding is that fisheries did issue 2 export permits for beluga whales at marine land, but owned by the Vancouver Aquarium, to be shipped to Valencia, Spain, where the Vancouver Aquarium operates a facility there on behalf of another. They essentially manage a Spanish aquarium. So those permits apparently were issued, and we've also had some indication from officials that 5 additional export permits have been sought for marine land to send 5 belugas to aquariums in the United States. Unless those belugas have been shipped out already, and we have no indication that they have been, they, as soon as this bill receives royal assent, will have to go through the process of seeking additional export permits, not just under CITES, which affects endangered species, but under S-203, so this new legal regime. So those whales can't be moved unless they already have been, without seeking new additional permits.
If I can just add to that. So Dr. Naomi Rose is a marine biologist with AWI, and she is looking every day to see if there have been any import permits into the United States. There haven't. They look every day. She said as soon as she finds out if there are any, she'll let us know. Also, I think it's important to note that with respect to the belugas going to the United States has a ban on belugas and their progeny that came from a certain area in Russia. That certain area in Russia, according to Database, is where marine land got all the belugas from, their live caught belugas. So those belugas can't even go into the United States. There's a ban on those belugas, as well as their progeny and any, like sperm and etc. So
that's the same reason, was it the Georgia Aquarium wasn't allowed to import?
No, because that ban wasn't in place at the time. The ban came in place almost immediately after Georgia Aquarium was denied. So we're thinking that we're thinking it's Georgia Aquarium that wants these belugas, but we're not sure. But yeah, we're not absolutely sure. We can't say for sure, but we do know there have not been any import permits thus far.
Export. People don't think there have been any. There have been exports, but
I don't know if the Canadian government has issued export permits for those 5.
No, the 2 others that were supposed to go to Spain.
I don't know if they've gone or not. I don't know. I don't know if there are any. Oh, you're talking about Spain. I don't know if there are any import. I know that there is an organization, Dolphin Area Free Europe or something, that is fighting very hard against those permits, against those beluga coming into Spain. So that's.
Should Marineland and the Vancouver Aquarium seek to divest itself of the whales and dolphins that they currently have in captivity? Where would you like to see them go? Ms. Cartwright, we spoke on the phone on Friday, and you mentioned that there's a Save the Whales sanctuary project, but it hasn't actually been set in place yet. So that, considering that could take a few years, what would you like to see happen in this time period?
Well, I think in this time period, they're likely going to stay where they are until we can secure the right facilities in the sea pens off of each coast. And so that will take time, and we obviously want to make sure that it's set up correctly. And then even though those might be set up, there is no guarantee that marine land will divest itself of those creatures. So we have to work on that next, is helping marine land see that the important next step for them is to release those whales and dolphins, and then to move into a whole new idea of how to be an entertainment facility and earn money. And I think Elizabeth has given some pretty fun ideas. You might think it's a little crazy, but think about that whole water show down in Las Vegas that they do. So it actually isn't a crazy idea. It's a great one. So we call on Marineland to release all of its whales and dolphins, and as soon as possible get them into a marine sanctuary. It'd be great if they would actually fund the marine sanctuary, actually, because when you think about it, those sanctuaries are going to be put in place in order to deal with a problem that they've created. So I would even call upon Marineland to actually divest itself of a great deal of its money and put that towards the sanctuaries that we need to build.
Point of information, so I'm just going to show my ignorance. Is there any aspect of grandfathering in this legislation?
Yes, there is. So all those, everyone that's in captivity now remains in captivity, but certainly Marineland could voluntarily send all of its whales and dolphins to sanctuary.
programs for conservation purposes?
No, there's no provisions. There is the ability to apply for governing council. Would you like to speak?
I'm going to apologize. So the only breeding that can be done right now at Marineland is with the belugas. The dolphins are all female, correct? Kiska's alone. And the belugas aren't part of the St. Lawrence. They can't go in there. They can't. The population is not what the population is in the St. Lawrence. So those belugas need to go into a sanctuary. Marineland has never done any conservation as far as I know. I know they've done the opposite of conservation, which is take from the wild. With respect to the import-exporting, I know that John Holer at Senate had indicated that he intended on getting some more dolphins from Russia. So that was very alarming.
Barbara, you want to finish what you were saying there?
I just wanted to say that it's also often a boondoggle when we talk about breeding in captivity for conservation. We need to focus on conserving those animals in the wild, in their homes, and we should put all our money and efforts into that and not to breeding them in captivity.
Could an argument be made for there's a scientific criteria? Could an argument be made under scientific auspices?
I suppose an argument always can be made. Yeah.
And I would say also that the way in which the bill is drafted, if there were a scientific argument and there was an order in council decision that this situation required it, it's highly hypothetical, but I can see that the legislation would allow for that because, in drafting it, as Willie did, we're looking at making sure that there was the grandfathering, that it was sensible steps that would make sure that we were not going to have the taking of whales and dolphins in captivity. Now, C-68 does that as well. Keeping them in captivity, breeding them in captivity is illegal as soon as this bill reaches the royal assent, but existing animals in captivity are not then deemed to be an illegal action by the enterprise that owns them. I will say also the Vancouver Aquarium, although I certainly agree with what Camille said about how litigious they've been, they did make a decision to say they would no longer keep whales and dolphins in captivity. And they do have an extensive scientific program, which Marineland doesn't. So they're different institutions. There's a lot of good work being done at the Vancouver Aquarium, for instance, on ocean plastics. They have an extensive scientific program, and they've picked up, when Harper killed the marine contaminants program of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, a lot of that work was picked up by Vancouver Aquarium. So they're a different character of operation, but we do encourage them not to have anything to do with keeping whales and dolphins in captivity, nor promoting it outside of Canada.
Just to ask a layman's question. The East and West Coast pens, what can you say about these structures you would like to have, these institutions you'd like to set up? Where's that at?
I think I'll leave Senator Moore and you.
With regard to the East Coast, Dr. Laurie Marino and her colleague Charles Vinnick. Charles is an interesting man. He ran the Cousteau Empire for a number of years. Then he took an orca, Iceland or Greenland, I'm sorry, I think it was Greenland, worked with the creature for 4 years. Getting it to start to forage on its own, roam a bit further, and then one day it came to work and the whale had jumped over the net and kept going. That is the movie Free Willy. This is the man who did that, and he works with Laurie Marino. They've been in Nova Scotia last year and again this spring. They visited a number of communities and it made presentations and asked the communities to consider establishing a sea sanctuary somewhere within their community. And I know then when they were in Shelburne, that community in Nova Scotia, they formed a committee to try to identify a site. And Laurie recently in a comment said that she's near naming a site in Nova Scotia. So the idea would be to have a small bay or cove, net off the entrance, have the creatures there. There's an area of acreage, 8 maximum belugas, for example, and they would create also an educational facility to go with it, hiring students and scientists, because if the creatures, they couldn't be released. If they could be worked up to that phase and be safely released, that'd be good. But otherwise, as an educational institute or facility, plus they have to feed them, so they'd be buying fish from the local fishermen. So it's a huge enterprise. They have the funding, and they've said that a number of times. And I'm hoping that they will, something that's so sure in Shelbourne, or if there are other facilities up on the eastern shore, I know they've been looking there as well. And I'm not sure what the area, I know in the West Coast, it's in both British Columbia and I think in the state of Washington, they've also been looking for a facility or an appropriate area for the orcas.
I think that individual members will be available for further discussion if anyone wants to do one-on-one interviews outside. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to all the colleagues. And one more time, today's a really good day for animals in Canada.